sentences from the paper by Robert Oppenheimer and Hartland Snyder that I'm referring to. The gravitational deflection of light will prevent the escape of radiation as the star contracts. The star thus tends to close itself off from any communication with a distant observer. Only its gravitational field persists. This was incredibly cutting-edge physics in 1939. The war intervened, and then, as I might speak about later, Oppie became very much a controversial figure, and indeed lost his security clearance and was ultimately quite humiliated and never got his Nobel. But the interesting thing about this man, and one of the things that inspired me to write the Oppenheimer Alternative, was here was a guy who we think of as an atomic physicist, but whose actual field of work before World War II was much more astrophysics than it was atomic physics. And when I set about to write a novel, I call it The Secret History of the Manhattan Project, meaning everything in it that is publicly known is not in the novel. Everything I say and everything in the public record, none of that is contradicted by anything in the novel. But in the blank spots that the historical record doesn't fill in, my novel tries to tell an entertaining story. As Oppie said to a journalist as he was being humiliated in 1953 in the security clearance hearings that ultimately resulted in him being stripped of his Q clearance, Q meaning access to atomic and nuclear weapons research, classified information. He said to a reporter, verbatim, this is true, if a reporter were to dig hard enough, he would find that this story is much deeper than my security clearance. No reporter ever dug, no reporter found that story, but I wanted to find a story that dealt with Oppenheimer, the cosmologist, or Oppenheimer, the astrophysicist, rather than Oppenheimer, the atomic scientist. And there we start off there. So with this revelation about black holes. But at the center of my story is the sun. You may be able to, let me see if I can make this work here. I'm having some fun learning about all the features of Zoom here. Here we have, all I have to do now, says my man, is hit the share screen button. And you should see now, in 2 seconds, the cover of the Oppenheimer Alternative. And what do we have here but sunbeams, an atom, the clock, based on the clock from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And it either is rays of light coming out of the sun, or if you look at it another way, the artist, Avery Olive from Bibliophilic Designs, did a spectacular job falling inward infinitely into the heart of it all. Oppie falling into the abyss. Let me stop sharing my screen, and I should be back on the picture now. I think that I am. So we start off with black holes, but I'm really interested in, as Oppie was, and some of his other researchers that worked under him, in stellar astrophysics. So every chapter of the novel begins with an epigraph, an actual real-life quote from one of the people involved, almost all of whom are scientists. This is not a product placement. I get nothing for it. In fact, I prefer Coke Zero, but my drugstore was out. So this is what I've got here. This is Hans Bethe in a letter of great candor writing to his mother in 1945. I am about the leading theoretician in America. That does not mean the best. Wigner is certainly better. And Oppenheimer and Teller, probably just as good. But I do more and talk more, and that counts too. Hans Bethe to his mother. So my novel spends actually only its opening few chapters on the period in which the atomic bomb was created. Most of the action takes place after Hiroshima and Nagasaki are lamentably bombed. But here's the scene a little earlier in 1945 where they're still working on the bomb. Now, you'll know the two characters, Hans Bethe, who I've just introduced you to, but another major figure in the Manhattan Project was Edward Teller. Now, the thing about Teller, unlike Oppenheimer, is he had no interest in fission. The bombs that were used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two very different designs. Fat Man, which was a complex new physics design based on plutonium, essentially an artificial element, and Little Boy, a straightforward design based on uranium and a detonation system that was straightforward. Fat Man used a whole new kind of detonation system, implosion design, very interesting, new engineering and new physics. Teller wasn't interested in either of those things. He was interested in fusion, not fission. As he said to Oppie, your grad students could make fission bombs. It's not worthy of us. We're too bright. This is too simple a problem. And so even though he was brought into the Manhattan Project, he spent almost all his time working on fusion science. And of course, there were no fusion reactors available, no fusion bombs. The place you would study, if you wanted to study nuclear fusion, was available to you, well, depending on the time of year, 12 or 16 hours a day. It was the sun. So here's another short scene from the novel. A short time later, Oppie stepped into Bethe's lab. This is at Los Alamos, New Mexico, into Bethe's lab. I thought I'd give you advance warning, Hans, before you run into Teller. Einstein has written back about Teller's fusion equations. Now, Bethe and Teller have had a big fight because Bethe has been told off. Teller says, your model of solar fusion math, it's not right. It can't be right. You're a fool. And Bethe says, no, it's right. I know Einstein. We're going to send my spectral plates and my paper to Einstein, and he'll figure it out for us. He'll tell us who's right. Well, Bethe spreads his arms. He goes, don't worry about bloodshed here on the Mesa. I shall be magnanimous in victory. Oppie held a match to the bowl of his pipe and, between puffs to get it going, said, I'm afraid, puff, puff, that good Dr. Einstein, puff, puff, has concurred with, puff, puff, our friend Edward. What? That can't be. Oppie had brought the letter with him after convincing Teller that there was no chance Hans would rip it up. Here, he said, proffering the sheet. Bethe's blue eyes scanned the page, and his normally unwrinkled brow creased below his short, stiff hair. Nein, he said. Herr Einstein ist ein... Well, if you're thinking about calling him a Doomkopf, Hans, you might want to think twice. But he says it cannot be. Don't take it so hard. We all make mistakes with our figures. You make mistakes. You make mathematical mistakes, Bethe said. Teller, he makes such gaffes, but I do not. Well, Einstein said, you had the sun 5 million degrees too hot. Oppie shrugged slightly. You must have guessed wrong about its temperature. Guessed? Repeated Bethe. I do not guess. I based my studies on specific, actual solar spectra. I derived the temperature I cited from the spectra. Oppie frowned. Did you analyze the spectra yourself, or did one of your grads do? Of course, myself. Absolutely. At Cornell. Well, when the war is over, you can double check. I will double check now, declared Bethe. I'll get one of my colleagues there to send the plates here. It's not that important. Have you seen Teller gloat? It is absolutely that important. If, as Einstein says, the sun is too cool for CNO cycle fusion, then what accounts for the carbon lines I detected? Well, assuming they're actually there, they are, Oppie. Bethe's frown deepened into a protractor-like semicircle. But if the sun has always been that cool, just 15 million degrees, then there should at best be only trace amounts of carbon in its spectra, inherited from the protostellar nebula, supplied Oppie. Took a contemplative draw on his pipe. It never should have been able to produce any of its own, any carbon of its own, that is. Exactly, said Beta. So the carbon spike you think you saw? Robert shook his head. Impossible. Eppur si muove, said Beta, throwing in an Italian accent for good measure. Oppie snorted. Yet it moves. What Galileo reputedly whispered after being forced to recant his claim that the Earth revolves around the sun. Facts are facts, Beta was saying. All right, Hans, but when your spectra arrive from Cornell, show them to me first, not Edward. I'd rather this whole fight went away. And if you shove them in his face, we'll get to see up what one of his fusion bomb super explosions would be like. The end of the little scene there. So there was an actual series of papers, but the most important one, let me bring it up on the screen here, by our good friend Hans Beta there. Oh, up on the, let me, sharing screens, I've always got to figure out how to hit the right button to do that. Share screen, and we want to go to the PDFs now. There's the paper on continued gravitational attraction that we were just talking about. The Oppenheimer-Snyder paper really exists, but the paper we want to talk about now is the one that this stupid thing wants to keep covering, is this one, energy production in stars. You don't have to read anything of it here, except you can see down here there's carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, CNO fusion. And Hans Beta, who was our greatest physical expert on the production of energy in stars, won his Nobel Prize, in fact, for that matter, with this paper, was absolutely convinced that it was CNO cycle fusion that powered our sun. Well, more or less, it's more complex than this, but we would tend to say, no, it's actually a simple proton-proton fusion that powers the sun. I won't go into all the details there, but I was fascinated by this. As a science fiction writer, it's a gift when somebody hands you a world-famous scientist who has apparently made a mistake. And that's a pretty big mistake for his fusion math to work. For the sun that Beta outlined in this paper in Physical Review to be correct, it had to be 5 million degrees Kelvin or Celsius hotter than it actually is. And I thought, well, what if he was right? What if he hadn't made this blunder? What if for a brief moment in time that he happened to capture in some solar spectra, the spectroscopic plates in the novel are fictitious, but the paper is real, that he happened to capture on a spectra showed that the sun had a brief hiccup, a brief experience of an ultra warm interior temperature that went largely unnoticed here on Earth. Although 1939 had a very hot summer, and that might have been attributable to it. And the novel's scientific plot hinges on this. I don't want to bog down on all of this, but just to say that I was fascinated to discover that Teller and Beta, who ended up one B and the other Beta first, and then Teller, being the world's greatest experts really on nuclear fusion, were there together at the Manhattan Project. Now, why does it say my screen is paused, sharing is paused? Why does it like to do that? Anyways, it seems to like doing that. But you had a taste of the paper there. Now, if you go to my website, you'll see on my website, which is sfwriter.com, there are links to all these papers. Just click on the Oppenheimer Alternative. You can see the actual papers. So I won't tell you why we suddenly get interested in getting human beings off the planet Earth in my novel, but the matter of fact is that we do. And I'm going to put up another image here. Let's do this. This one, and now let's see if I can share this screen here. Where is share screen? And I want to share this and share, and I don't want to stop share. Good. You should be seeing now a map of the planet Mars. Now you can't read it, but down in the lower right-hand corner of this map is the date this map was made. And if I asked any of you to guess when it was made, I bet you would guess that it was made sometime a long time ago, because here are Percival Lowell's famous canals crisscrossing the surface of Mars. This map is the official United States Air Force map. It says so right down here in this corner of the planet Mars as it was conceived to be by the United States Air Force and the US government in 1962. 1962. And we're going to come back to that in a second, but I just want to let you know that one of the great joys in writing this book was trying to figure out how long ago we still thought there might be canals on Mars. So here's a scene that takes place actually before even this map was made. I will come back here and I will stop the share and I will stop the screen share. I think you're seeing me now. Randy, where you nod, anybody nod if you're seeing me. You're seeing me, good, all right. So here, this is, that map was from 1962. Here's an astronomy book by Sir Harold Spencer Jones, who was the Astronomer Royal in Great Britain. In his book, Life on Other Worlds, which was in print through various printings through 1959. Again, it was fascinating to learn as I wrote this book, how much of solar astronomy and planetary astronomy was first worked out within living memory. Not mine yet, I'm not that old, but there are people alive today who did think there were canals on Mars, who didn't know that it was even fusion that powered the sun, and so on and so forth. People who were scientifically literate. So here's a little scene. First, I'm going to read you just this little quote from Sir Harold Spencer Jones' Life on Other Worlds, various printings from 1959. There can be no question about the existence of at least the most conspicuous of them, meaning the canals of Mars. Some can be seen in telescopes of moderate size, and a few have been photographed. We find clear evidence of changes taking place, which we can only attribute to the growth of vegetation. Again, a standard astronomy text in use through 1959. So, General Groves and Oppie and his team become very interested in the course of my novel of whether or not humans could live on Mars and whether we could put humans there in the foreseeable future. So here's another little scene. This is Groves speaking. So, said the general, as we discussed before, our initial thought is Mars, right? But let's take a moment to consider if that really is the best choice. Mars is damn near the only choice, said tall blonde Louis Alvarez, now 34, a sharp-tongued San Franciscan who was leaning against the wall. True, said Oppie, seated at his desk. Of course, a man couldn't easily live there. Are we sure of that? Asked Deke Parsons, a decade older than Alvarez, with graying temples and the front line of his hair in retreat against his advancing forehead. Yes, said Oppie. No, said Alvarez. Depends who you ask, said I, Robbie, seated by the back window. Apparently, said Groves. We're asking you, the gentleman in this room. Yeah, the problem is there are no recent studies, really, said Oppie. When he'd lived in California, he'd closely followed the work done at the Mount Wilson Observatory near Pasadena. From time to time, every 780 days to be precise, the sun, Earth, and Mars line up perfectly. Mars is in opposition then, since it's directly opposite the sun from Earth's point of view. Obviously, that's a good time for observing because it means when Mars is up in the sky at any given place on Earth, the sun is down and vice versa. But not all such oppositions are created equal, said Oppie. You hear that Earth has an elliptical orbit. That's technically true, but it's got very little eccentricity. It's almost circular. The same isn't true for Mars, though. So sometimes when an opposition occurs, Mars is significantly closer to us than at other times. Truly favorable oppositions, when Mars also happens to be at perihelion, as close as it gets to both us and the sun, only happen once every 15 or 17 years. At such an opposition, Mars is almost twice as wide in our telescope eyepieces as it is at an unfavorable one, letting us make out much more surface detail. The last favorable opposition was in 1939, Before that, 1924. But that one, 1924, was pretty much a dud. A Martian dust storm covered most of the planet's surface. Groves frowned. And the next, what'd you call it? Favorable opposition? Not for a decade, said Oppie. September 1956. They always occur in August or September, by the way. A dozen large Mars maps and photographs were piled on Oppie's desk. Topmost was a pen and ink map made by Gerard de Vaucouleurs, based on observations by himself and 4 other astronomers during the favorable opposition of 1939 and the ordinary one of 1941. It was the most recent map of Mars anyone had produced. What about the canals? Grove asked, standing now and waving a thick finger over 3 dotted north-south lines near the center labeled Fison, Euphrates, and Hiddekel. Similar lines also appeared elsewhere. Good question, said Oppie. No one knows. They were discovered in 1877 by Giovanni Schiaparelli, but he called them canali, Italian for channels. The idea that they might be artificial canals comes from Percival Lowell 2 decades later. Of course, even Lowell had to admit that the visible lines are unlikely to be watercourses per se. The narrowest object we can perceive on the Martian surface are a mile wide. And in the thin Martian atmosphere, shallow water would quickly evaporate away to that much surface area. But they could be narrower waterways bordered on either side by by swaths of vegetation. In that case, it would be the accompanying green banks that we're actually seeing. Groves pointed at the pile. Show me a photo of them. Oppie, on the other side of the desk, raised thin shoulders. There's a problem. Oh, there are a few photographs that seem to show the canals, but most of the pictures we have of them are drawings. Why on Mars would that be? Well, see, the difficulty is the lengthy exposure times needed for taking astronomical photos. The longer you keep the lens uncovered, the more the rippling of the Earth's own atmosphere blurs things. Lots of observers have seen the canals, myself included. We can see things in the night sky that film simply can't record. So this is absolutely true. This scene in 1945 was a reasonable discussion about whether or not there were canals on the surface of Mars. And I'm going to jump ahead a bit, and I may come back to another bit of science. I don't want to take too much of it. I'm going to jump ahead to where that bubble actually gets burst. First, though, I have to hold up a book here. Yes, of course, the most important book tonight is mine, but here's an interesting book. The Project Mars, A Technical Tale. And I don't know if you can see the author's name on it right there, but it is Dr. Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun. It's a science fiction novel. And von Braun had a terrible time getting it published. This is an actual quote from him. Him summarizing the 18 editors who rejected his novel when he tried to get it published. Who's interested in the Mars atmosphere or the initial thrust of a satellite? The story lacks a girl. Well, that's what he felt was missing in his book, but he didn't know how to do it. Ultimately, many of us Jeff and Dave may or may not know, the great Canadian publisher Apogee. But if you're a space buff in Canada, there I see Alan reacting with great recognition there. They did the Apollo mission reports, the Gemini, the Mercury mission reports. They have been the great official publisher. They're based in Burlington, Ontario, of NASA's mission reports documents in book form for 20 odd years now. Fabulous stuff, fabulous stuff. Anyways, they eventually published the English language translation, the first English language translation of the horrible, execrable, unreadable novel, Project Mars by Werner von Braun. But there it is. I'll just put it down. But von Braun is a character in my novel, and I have him show up at the Institute for Advanced Study, where Oppenheimer and the rest of Oppie's crew are staying together. This is the secret part of the secret history, to try and save Earth from destruction. And von Braun has come running from JPL, running by plane, all the way to Princeton, New Jersey, the day before Mariner 4, 1965, gave us our first close-up views of the planet Mars. And I'm going to share that screen. I call it the most heartbreaking picture in all of science. Let me see if I can share that one here for us. There it is. You're seeing, I hope, a graphic now. And maybe I can make it a bit bigger. No, it doesn't want to become any bigger in the shared screen. All right. That is, sadly, what Mariner 9 brought back for all of us to look to. And here's a little scene where von Braun at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton is breaking the news that all of those beliefs that seemed reasonable right up to 1962, that maybe there was vegetation and canals on Mars, just don't, hold water. Let's skip the appetizers and get down to the giblets, said von Braun, still boyish at 53. The key photo is this one. That's the one I'm showing you now. This one, number 11. He moved it to the table center and the other scientists craned to look at it. Oppie felt his heart jump. He heard I, Robbie, suck in his breath. And Kitty, that's Oppie's wife, murmured, crap. This was taken at a distance of 7,800 miles, said von Braun, who stepped back now so the others could see the photo. East to west, it covers 170 miles. North to south, 150. Where? Demanded Oppie. What coordinates? Von Braun consulted a series of stapled sheets he had brought with him. It's centered on 31 degrees south and 7 degrees east. Oppie turned his attention to the giant Air Force map that I'd shown you previously. This one. To the giant Air Force map from 1962, flattening out its creases with his palm. He quickly found the spot. On the map, a canal cut diagonally across the middle of the area, starting in the southwest and running up to the northeast as it flowed from Mare Cimmerium to Mare Serenum. These, by the way, these mare have terrible names. Mare Cimmerium and Mare Serenum are actually different places. Never get lost on Mars. The directions they give you, you'll be hopeless. But forgive my pronunciation. Anyways, from Mare Cimmerium to Mare Serenum. And in the Mariner photo, and we'll go back, I want to continue sharing. Don't pause. Keep sharing that photo. There's the Mariner photo. Your screen is sharing. Very good. And in the Mariner photo, maybe, just maybe, if he really, really, really willed himself to see it, there was a diagonal line, although at a less steep angle, running, no, not even into a sea or a plane, but into, there was nothing else it could be, was there? Into a crater. Only one half of its rim was clearly visible, like the bowed part of a capital D, but it dominated most of the frame. And the bloody thing wasn't alone. Oppie quickly counted 8 other craters in the photo. In photo 11, given the size of the area being portrayed, the D crater was perhaps 80 miles across, and the one adjacent to it maybe 30. And the rest were, 2 were 20, and the rest were down to 10, or as little as 5. Oppie knew that Mare Cimmerium was named in honor of the Cimmerians. Cimmerians, a people Homer mentioned in the Odyssey, who lived in perpetual darkness. After 3.5 centuries of looking at the red planet through telescopes, that darkness had finally lifted, and mankind was at last seeing the true face of its celestial neighbor. It was heartbreaking. It was like looking at the goddamned moon. In photo 11, there were small craters within large craters, and some craters overlapped and obliterated parts of others. And once you've seen them in this, the sharpest of the pictures, you couldn't help but seeing them in the other photos too. Craters everywhere, but no sign of water. No sign of water erosion, just dusty death. Even worse than that, death implied that there'd once been life, but this planet's surface looked ancient, untouched for billions or millions of years, utterly sterile. And now I think I'm back and you're seeing me. So Mars was not going to hold the answers for our friends here. There's a bunch of other stuff I want to cover, or I could cover, but I think what I want to do is take a little bit of break on my vocal cords, see if anybody's got a question here. Conan the Cimmerian, somebody said here. I love these accents, as somebody else says here. Thank you. When I'm tired, they all start to sound like Count Dracula. All my European accents sound like they want to suck your blood. But today I'm not doing too badly. In any event, if anybody's got a question, you can either raise your hands and Randy will answer it. I'm just going to let my vocal cords rest for a second. We can go on. There are a couple more scientific areas I want to discuss, but anybody
sure,
there?
That's fine. Yeah. Probably the best thing to do is to type your question in, or even just type in that you have a question, and I'll recognize you and you can unmute. Tell folks how to use the chat. Good idea, David.
Well, you know, people hold it. Well, I guess we've got more people than we can see on the screen here, don't we?
If you put your cursor just below Robert's head, you should see a chat, and the chat should come up, and then you can type in your message. So that's a good idea. So I have a question for you, Robert. So what kind of things did you find out about Oppenheimer that really surprised you, apart from just his astronomy background?
You know, what I knew about J. Robert Oppenheimer was what everybody knew, which was that he was a genius. What I did not know was that he was also simultaneously an idiot. And in fact, at his Q clearance hearing, when the prosecutor, Roger Robb, said to him, after he had incriminated both himself and his best friend, "Why, sir, did you do that?" And I won't bore you with what the details were, but Oppie's answer for the record was, "Because I was an idiot." My plot actually hinges on the fact that Oppie did this idiotic thing. Several times during the course of the narrative he does. If I was writing non-historical characters, a novelist isn't allowed to do that. We call it an idiot plot. When the action advances because the character does something monumentally stupid, solely so the action can advance. Alien is a great film. Aliens is a great film, but the prequel, Prometheus, is a terrible film that hinges on an idiot plot, part of which is a bunch of astronauts seeing something moving in the alien spaceship wreckage, deciding to loom in with their faces and let's have a good look at this movie so that it could break through their glass and glom onto their faces. And you think those guys are idiots. They have no training whatsoever. So you're not allowed normally, but Oppenheimer time and again did utterly idiotic things. I think that's the biggest lesson. And we have a question here from somebody. Was that you, David Brennan, wrote, "Are you considering doing a Wernher von Braun book?" Somebody typed that.
David Sutherland.
Peter. Okay, Peter, the answer is, I did. Von Braun is very much a character in the Oppenheimer Alternative. And so is Edward Teller, and so is John von Neumann. Much of the action takes place at the Institute for Advanced Study. Von Neumann was there, and as you may know, von Neumann invented the architecture that we use in all our modern computers. He invented it at the Institute for Advanced Study. And what he was trying to do was flawlessly predict the weather. This was part before Lorentz discovered that chaos theory made it impossible to flawlessly predict the weather. But that's what von Neumann was working on. So von Braun is in there, Teller is in there, Kurt Gödel is in there as well. Everybody is in there. I've got a 4-page dramatis personae at the beginning. But in terms of major characters with their own central scenes, von Braun for sure Teller, absolutely. And von Neumann for sure.
The thing that fascinates me, especially with von Braun, is he was not only a brilliant scientist, but he was a political animal. He understood
Yes.
how to deal with politics. I mean, I remember talking to one of the Apollo guys who fought in World War II, and I asked him, like, what was it like literally 20 years, less than 20 years after the war, where you were fighting the Germans, now you're working with them to get into space. And he said that a lot of them had trouble with that. So here was von Braun, who came over, led this group in New Mexico, went to Huntsville, dealing with presidents and senators and whatever. And he was, in everyone's mind, he was an ex-Nazi. And he was given the responsibility for a multi-billion-dollar effort, essentially part of the Cold War and everything. That it fascinates me. But from what I've read about Oppenheimer, he didn't have that political animal background. Is that the way?
Oppenheimer's downfall was his communist associations. He had never been a member of the Communist Party, but his wife Kitty was. His brother Frank Oppenheimer, who, if you've ever been to the Exploratorium in California, Frank is the founder of the Exploratorium, as well as many other fine things in his own right. Oppie became a political animal when he fell in love with a woman, Jean Tatlock, who was a political animal. And since she was interested, he became interested. Von Braun, the Tom Lehrer song about Werner von Braun, you should all Google it after this. Because I can't get the lyric right, but I won't even spoil it for you. Just go Tom Lehrer, L-E-H-R-E-R, Lehrer, a satirist, and his song about Werner von Braun will have you in stitches if you've never heard it. Everybody loved it except von Braun, who sued and lost his lawsuit, but sued. But it talks about expediency, political expediency, because von Braun was an SS member, a uniformed SS member in World War II. And actually, this is a good segue. Why don't we go into a scene that has von Braun? You mentioned that, of course, absolutely, we're dealing with the reality in our world that Werner von Braun was the man who put Apollo on the moon. But, von Braun, whose V2 rockets, by the way, anybody know what V stands for? Here's a good trivia question for you. By the way, and what's that?
Victory?
Vengeance.
Yes.
Whoever
said that?
Allegiances, O2 expedience.
Yes. Now you're doing, that's right. That's right.
Nazi, he won't even frown. Nazi schmatzi, says
That's
Werner
von Braun. That's David singing Tom Lehrer for us. It stood for vengeance. And it was the prototype that led to the Apollo 11 Saturn rocket. But somebody asked in the questions here, forgive me, I just don't see who it is who's asking. I just see the questions. Somebody said, who's your favorite character of all these scientists? And actually the favorite character for me is Leo Szilard. Not everybody knows Szilard. It's S-Z-I-L-A-R-D. He said Szilard, but a lot of Americans say Szilard. Szilard with no Z or Z sound in it. Szilard, and Leo, not Leo. Leo is how he said it. But Leo, Francis, there's an emergency light flashing on you. Like you're flashing red in a beacon. Have the police come to arrest you there? I see you there. Leo Szilard is the man who first foresaw the possibility of a nuclear chain reaction, an atomic nuclear chain reaction. He ghost wrote the letter that was signed by Albert Einstein to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, urging the establishment of what became the Manhattan Project. But it was Szilard who wrote the letter. Indeed, the first line of the letter, putatively by Einstein, says, some recent work by E. Fermi, meaning Enrico Fermi, and L. Szilard, meaning Leo Szilard, blah, 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 has led me to believe. Szilard is quite the man behind the scenes throughout almost everything that happened there. And I'm going to read you a section here. I'm going to briefly screen share if I can. Let's see if I can do this right this time. a different picture. This is the cover. Oh, I got to push that screen share button, don't I? Oh, I wish this made it a little easier to do that screen sharing thing. Maybe if I put that screen over there, I can see what I'm doing better. Where is that screen share button?
Green one?
There it is. And I want to share. Oh, but now it only wants to share the screen that's active. That's not good. Come on. Yeah, frustrating thing. All right, now I'll try again. I've got 3 monitors, and it seems to want to be finicky about sharing which monitor. So, let me just haul it all back into the main screen here. I'm sorry, folks. And share screen. And what I want to show you here is the American cover of my book. What's behind me is the Canadian one. What do we have here? Vertically standing next to J. Robert Oppenheimer. That's Mars, by the way, at the top. But what we have here is a very strange spaceship design. And this is a real, honest to goodness, late 1950s and early 1960s actual spaceship design that was in serious development called Project Orion. And I'm going to read you while this picture is on screen one very, wordy paragraph, because what it is it's an excerpt from a feasibility study for a nuclear bomb-propelled space vehicle, being a contract between the United States Air Force and the company known as General Atomic on June 30th, 1958. And that feasibility study says it may be possible to propel a vehicle weighing several thousand tons to velocities several times Earth escape velocities. A circular disc, there it is at the bottom, if you can see what my mouse is doing, right above the M in Oppenheimer. A circular disc of material, which is called the pusher, is connected through a shock-absorbing mechanism. That's the mechanism. That's these vertical shafts rising up above the letter M in Oppenheimer. A shock-absorbing mechanism to the ship proper, which is everything further above, which is above the pusher shocker absorber assembly. Everything above the line here about with the middle of Oppie's chin is the ship proper. Below that is the pusher shocker assembly. Nuclear bombs, which are stored in the ship proper, are fired periodically below the pusher. Each bomb is surrounded by a massive propellant. As a result of each explosion, the propellant strikes the pusher plate, right above the letter M here, strikes the pusher plate and drives it upward into the shock absorbers, these 2 vertical shafts, upward into the shock absorbers, which then deliver a structurally tolerable impulse to the ship, pushing it ahead. Let's stop share now. So that is a real life, honest to God design. And Orion, somebody's just written here, Freeman Dyson, my friend. That must be, of course, either David or Jeff, who is referring to Dyson as my friend, passed away in his 90s, the core designer of Orion. You betcha. We'll be talking about Freeman in a minute or two. I don't know, not if it's true. Were you able to see my mouse pointer when I was doing the, yeah, good, okay. So here's a little scene. Here's my man, Leo Szilard, coming out to General Atomics in 1958, and he catches sight of somebody he thinks he's heard of moving across the land there. You there, big man, wait! Leo Szilard moved quickly to catch up with the broad-shouldered fellow. Yes? The voice was accented and higher pitched than one might have expected based on his size. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Ja. Ah, sehr gut, said Szilard, and he continued on in German. Then you must indeed be him. He put his hands on his hips. Well, well, well. Werner von Braun, at last. The big man, although stocky, had nowhere near Szillard's girth, but he was a head taller than the Hungarian. And who might you be? Leo was surprised. I'm Szilard, that's who. Surely you know. Oh, said von Braun, sounding unimpressed. What are you doing here in San Diego? One might ask the same of you. I heard you were in Texas with your rockets. They were out front of the circular technical library that was at the heart of the new General Atomic facility in Torrey Pines. Oppenheimer had mentioned that they were working on here, von Braun said. Of course, I'd seen Ulam and Everett's report back in 1955, but I hadn't realized anyone had taken it seriously. The work being done here, dubbed Project Orion, had grown from Stanislaw Ulam's idea, first put forth right after the Trinity test, that's the first atomic bomb test, of using exploding bombs to repel spaceships. Oh, they take it very seriously indeed, said Zillard. Freeman Dyson has come out here from the Institute for Advanced Study. He'll be part of Orion for at least this academic year. Dyson, yes, a sharp mind, that one. Von Braun looked down at Zillard, and perhaps not just literally. Leo knew the German essentially was an engineer and had little use for the kind of Luftmensch thinking Zillard was famous for. So, von Braun said, then what do you think? Their propulsion scheme, popping an endless stream of small fusion bombs out a trapdoor, like seeds from a watermelon, and exploding them to push a space vessel ahead? Visionary. Leo put a hand on his chest. I contributed one idea myself. Have you ever used a Coca-Cola machine? Well, of course. So efficient. You select what you want, and a mechanism neatly delivers the bottle. I said that's how they should move their bombs, from storage aboard the spaceship to the trap door, selecting from a variety of bomb sizes depending on the propulsive need. Dyson loved the notion. Dyson loved the notion. He tells me engineers from Coca-Cola in Atlanta will be here next week to show them how it's done. That's really true. The taller man's eyes narrowed. I hear you have Oppenheimer's ear. Will you tell him you favor this project over your rockets? Said Leo. Come now. You yourself must know that Orion is far more efficient technology. But rocketry is proven technology, declared von Braun. This is moonshine. Zillard smiled. Rutherford used the same word to describe lots of energy by splitting the atom, by getting lots of energy by splitting the atom. But we did that. I used the same word to describe H.G. Wells' notion of atomic bombs, and then we built it. Of course it was built, said von Braun. It was simple, straightforward engineering, like my rockets. Your rockets? Leo made an exasperated sound. You want everyone to believe that all you ever cared about was building rockets for space travel. Don't deny it. But what you were actually building, what you were charged with building, were missiles to fly just 1,000 kilometers from Germany to Britain. Yes, sure, that's something chemically fueled rockets are good for. Tiny hops. But such things are all but useless for making trips to other planets. You need to read my novel, Project Mars. I can send you the manuscript. I know your ideas for manned spaceflight, but rockets work, said von Braun. But this mad Orion scheme, I, for one, prefer the tried and true instead of something cobbled together out of a soft drink vending machine and giant springs. Well, that's Project Orion in a nutshell. It was really and truly undergoing work. As somebody's just posted here, Sagan described it in Cosmos. Indeed, he did, although Sagan had nothing to do with it, of course. The book you want to read is actually this one, Project Orion by Freeman Dyson's son, George. Great book, out of print, well mentioned. Absolutely wonderful read. And I was just thrilled to death. Amongst various people who gave me blurbs for my novel, I got a great one from George. I sent the book to Freeman. Sadly, Freeman passed away. He got the book, and 2 weeks later, he was dead. Got the advanced reading copy. The book wasn't out, but the manuscript. Would have loved a blurb from him, would have loved his approval of his portrayal, but his son felt I did justice to him and to Project Orion in the novel. Claude Shannon. Oh, come on. Just go and read my novel. If somebody said if someone here knows Claude Shannon, my head will explode. The father of modern information theory. Go read my novels, Wake, Watch, and Wonder. They're all about Shannon entropy, and zip plots and all that stuff. I know all this. Come on. You're talking to science fiction writers. We know all these things. Anyways, now why did we not end up going to the moon or Mars on Project Orion? It's a really interesting question because it is, for the first time in the history of science, an area of technology research was actually outlawed. We didn't outlaw atomic bomb research. We didn't outlaw hydrogen bomb research, but we outlawed the explosion of either under the Limited Test Ban Treaty in outer space. And so, as there's a great paper by Freeman Dyson about the death of a project. And Dyson, let's see if I've got that one here. Dyson talks about this in great length, and I'll bring up just so you can see the paper on your screen. 1 second here. Death of a project. It was published in the journal Science in 1965. Let me do our screen share here and grab the right screen for us. There it is. Share. The first time in the history of science that governments had made a policy, and not as a goal to stop Project Orion, but it had the effect. We would not use atomic or nuclear weapons in space, even to propel a spaceship. So the fact that von Braun won had very little to do with him having superior technology, very little to do with it being the best way. We see now that his technique was hopelessly inadequate for getting us to Mars in any reasonable time. We could have gotten to Mars. The mantra of Project Orion, you know what it was? Mars by 65, meaning 1965, the moons of Saturn by 1970. And Freeman Dyson and their team, Ted Taylor and the rest, thought they could do it, but they were ultimately stymied by what happened to Project Orion. So again, part of that fascinating scientific history there that I get to mine, because during the period of my writing, it absolutely was a huge part of what was going on. Let me share another screen with you here, and we'll go to one more page here. And this is a page from the astronaut. Are we still seeing the screen share? I think we are. It says we are. This is the Astronomical Journal from October 1959. And way, way down at the bottom here, you see the word name Frank Drake right here at the bottom. And over here, we also see actually just F.D. Drake. Well, who is F.D. Drake? I will I'm showing the paper exists. The link to it is on my website. We'll stop sharing and I'll come back and talk to you. Well, here's a little scene. Richard Feynman, another major character in the Oppenheimer Alternative, in 1959 shows up holding that paper, that little note. It was a note in the Astrophysical Journal. Holding it up, he walks into Oppie's office at the Institute for Advanced Study and says, Dick Feynman, holding a scientific journal, came into Oppie's office. Forget about humanity going to Europa, he announced. Frank Drake's got a note in here. He found decimetric radiation coming from Jupiter. Deci, not deca. Dim, D-I-M, not damn, D-A-M. Oppie frowned. So 100 times shorter than the earlier discovery, which, crap, that would mean it's bingo, said Feynman. Synchrotron radiation emitted by electrons hurtling at relativistic speeds in the Jovian counterpart of the Van Allen belts. Radiation 1,000,000 times more intense than that in our own radiation belts. And before you ask, I've already worked it out. Jupiter's moons Io, Europa, Ganymede, and even Callisto probably orbit within Jupiter's Van Allen belts. Maybe Europa does have an ocean, as some have suggested, but its surface has to be uninhabitable. We might as well try to move a human colony inside a nuclear pile. Oppie gestured for Feynman to hand him the journal. Now, I'm going to interrupt here for a second. Frank Drake, many of you will know him, of course, for his work that came subsequent to this. This is 59. Drake only started publicly publishing about SETI in 1960. But every Robert J. Sawyer novel has sly references to Star Trek in it. Now, how do you get those in a novel that's mostly set before Star Trek premiered in 1966? Well, you just put them in there and hope somebody will notice. So here's Oppie Feynman hands him the journal, and he says, looking at Drake's name, Drake was a good empirical research scientist, steady, reputable, occasionally brilliant. Well, that's what Spock said about Dr. Layton in the Star Trek episode, The Conscience of the King, but it's also equally applicable here to Frank Drake, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, and I know Dave Brin has met him, and Jeff, I'm sure, has met him. Some of you have met him. He is a steady, reputable, and occasionally brilliant research scientist. His conclusion, presented in the usual dispassionate voice of such things, a total number of particles 10 to the 6 times greater than in the terrestrial system, meaning in the Van Allen belts, will suffice to explain the observations. That meant Feynman was right. There was no way any biological molecules could long survive on the surface of Europa or the other major Jovian moons. So I had a great amount of fun with all these characters. I see we've been going for almost an hour and a quarter at this point. I don't want to overstay my welcome, but I also see there's a whole bunch of questions here. So I do have some other stuff I could go back to that's formal.
Just a quick question, Rob,
yeah.
From Betty. Is Oppie Oppenheimer's real nickname? Or
so yes, it is. Now, when Oppie was studying in Holland for a time, it was his Dutch colleagues that gave him the nickname, and they spelled it O-P-J-E, which would be pronounced Oppie in Dutch. And it caught on when he came back to be at Cambridge, and then when he came to UC Berkeley, and his old friends would always use it, but his good friends would use it, but his really old friends spelled it O-P-J-E, and his later friends spelled it with an American spelling, O-P-P-I-E, or occasionally O-P-P-Y. His wife was the only one who hated it. She always called him Robert, but would not call, or maybe Bob now and again, but would not call him Oppie. But yes, that's the real nickname. Somebody wrote here, I was crushed to learn from Mariner 2 that there were no oceans on Venus, but I fixed that in the story. Well, then I know who said that. Absolutely.
A lot of these are actual comments. We just got a few minutes left, so if you've got a quick question, please type it in. And let's just talk. You say you've got other projects on the go, Robert. What's going?
Those don't matter.
Okay.
I mean, yes, I do. There actually going to be a big formal announcement very shortly. I signed a very nice contract with a very big player to produce a very big project. You'll hear about it soon, but it's actually embargoed at the moment. Szilard wrote Voice of the Dolphin, a sci-fi novel. It's actually a collection of science fiction short stories. The title story is Voice of the Dolphin. Very much well worth reading, but yes, he's one of our science fiction writing colleagues. Somebody corrected it here, a collection of short stories. Sagan certainly talked about this. Somebody said Niven and Purnell used Orion. They did. They were certainly not the first. Clark and Kubrick originally wanted to use Orion for the Discovery, the Orion atomic bomb design for Discovery, but ultimately because 2001 was the very next movie for Kubrick after Dr. Strangelove, he felt that he couldn't make an anti-nuclear war movie that ended with bombs going off and then make a movie where the use of atomic bombs exploding against a pusher plate was a good thing. It would undermine what he'd tried to say in his previous movie. And so they used the name Orion for the space shuttle in 2001 as a little reminder. Frank Drake and I presume that's Dave saying this here, served on the NASA Innovative and Adaptive Concepts program. And Dave has put a link in there. Certainly, He's a nice guy. Oppie guessed wrong about Callisto, though. And that's right. He did guess wrong about Callisto. It wasn't Oppie who did the math, though. It was actually Feynman. But yes, he did guess wrong. So that's all the questions that were up there that I saw anyways. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Or maybe Randy has something he wants to pose?
No, just a lot of appreciation, Robert, for your time. At the bottom, besides share screen, there's a place where you can put your reaction. You can clap for Robert. So you should go to gallery screen and see everyone clapping for Robert for
Oh, well, that's lovely.
excellent, excellent presentation. And
thank you. I'm going to share one more screen with you.
Okay.
I think I'm sharing. Am I sharing now?
No, we see you.
Well, if you don't, the thing to see if you can only see one thing is me. But let's see where that screen got to. Oh, come on, that's the one I want to share, and hopefully that is now showing my website.
Perfect.
And if you go there and sfwriter.com and then click on the Oppenheimer Alternative, the papers that I alluded to are there. The images I showed you, that map of Mars from the United States Air Force, that photo from Mariner 4 in 1965, everything is there for your viewing pleasure. So sfwriter.com is where you want to go for more information. I'm so pleased that my friends David and Jeff dropped in. Thank you. Oh, and I see Mary Truzillo, also an award-winning science fiction writer and very well-renowned, as is Jeff, science fiction poet. Wow. And speaking of the science fiction poets who are here, Carolyn Klink has popped up her Cosmosphere from the original Orion, the original Cosmos. David Brin is saying hi to Carolyn there. My friends, thank you so much. And to Randy, always a pleasure. We're going to have to do chicken wings again, Randy, at yes. Orwell's Pub at Islington and Kiel.
We're there, yes.
Cool.
I'd love to do that.
Be well, my friends. Take care.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks very much. And
live long and prosper.
If you're driving along 403, anybody, and you see a car with a license plate SF Writer and it doesn't look like Robert, then it's most likely Carolyn behind.
That's right.
And I did that one day. That was great. Thank you very much, Robert.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, guests. So just one quick announcement. Our next meeting is 2 weeks tonight. It'll be a potpourri meeting. So if anyone has any presentations they would like to make, we've already had a couple volunteers. I'll put a note out on the RASC list. But otherwise, thank you for an excellent night, everyone who participated here tonight. And go buy Robert's book and books because you'll enjoy them very much. And a lot of chats coming in, Robert, here, thanking you from everybody. So I'll leave that up for a bit, but thank you very much, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh, well, now he'll be gone by the time. By the time you grab it, he will be gone.
Not here?
Yeah, I took it upstairs.
Oh.
I'm still... Oh, Jeff, I'm still here. I hear Jeff talking to...
Oh, yeah, I was going to say I should grab the copy of the book and just wave it to...
Oh, please do. That's right. Yes, okay. Yes. You can grab your Hugo and wave that around too if you want, you know.
Oh, that would be beyond the pale, but I do. There you go.
Very good. I will be online for a minute or two more because I'm reading all the lovely comments people put up.
Great, yes.
So if anybody else has a
question for Robert,
unmute. If you have something to say now, we're a small group. Unmute yourself.
There we are. I don't know if you realized it, Robert, but Jeff was in his car at the beginning of the talk.
Oh, really?
Driving home. Then he was in his garage, and now we're getting a tour of his house. So
that's right.
That's great.
Jeff and Mary and Carolyn and I have been friends for decades. They're such wonderful people. It's the beauty. And I'll tell this to you people. I know some people said, oh, my God, Jeff Landis, holy cow, David Brin, right? The reality is there's a very small number of us who do this professionally, write science fiction, especially setting aside the fantasy words, who actually write science fiction. We're a very small group. We genuinely like each other. There's that one guy we don't talk about, but everybody else we like. I'm kidding. We get along well. I was here when Jeff was presenting recently for... well, it was the Physics and Astronomy Club at the University of Toronto that brought you and Catherine Asaro and John Kramer in to talk a few months ago, right? Well, pre-lockdown a few months ago. So I guess
Right.
last year probably. But of course, I went to see Jeff. We're a small group and of professional writers, and we really, and some of us have cats, and we really do support each other. Thank you. There is an audiobook version. It's read by somebody who can actually pronounce all the German words and the Dutch words, and there's a little bit of Hungarian. His name is Joshua Bloomberg, and he does. So if you are on Audible or iTunes, the audiobook is available. So is the ebook. But thank you for the kind words about my reading. I felt I was way below my game tonight. This is my third online event for the day.
Wow.
It's just the way it worked. It's just the way it worked out.
You're a
And so
monster.
the vocal cords are suffering a bit. Snow Lab. Somebody said they were thinking of me at Snow Lab. Of course, my novels Hominids, Humans, and Hybrids are set at what used to be known as the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, 6,800 feet below the surface of Sudbury, speaking of places that look barren like the surface of the moon, where a Nobel Prize winner, Art MacDonald, did his work on the solar neutrino problem, and where I set the portal between our universe and an alternate reality in my Hugo winner Hominids and its two sequels. So yes, thank you for that comment. And just I see lots of thank yous and a hi to Carolyn. And somebody said great novel. I certainly appreciate that. And so much research. I love doing the research. I don't know how it is for Jeff. David may have left us already, but it's my favorite part. Now, Jeff, you're a full-time researcher, so maybe, when you're done at the end of the day, you don't want to. But for me, I just write the novels to support my research habit. Revenue Canada will not let me write off all these lovely books that I want to buy, right? Unless I have something that actually monetizes it at the end. So I got to write books so that I can buy books and deduct them from my income tax. It's as simple as that. That's why I write. To keep the government off my neck, unlike the cat that is right at Jeffrey's jugular right there.
He's the shoulder cat.
The shoulder cat. That's Shoulderger's cat. They're not all gems, folk, at this time of night. How many hours of research? Hours. A year is the answer. Hours isn't even the right metric. I'm very fortunate at this point in my career. I'm set. I have enough money in the bank that I never have to work again. So I took 4 years writing this book. And the first year was nothing but full-time research. I spent an entire year, that's 40-hour work weeks, reading everything that had ever been written about the Manhattan Project, the transcripts of Oppie's security hearing, talking to those scientists, or at one step removed. One of my great friends, who's also a colleague of Jeff's and of Dave's, is Dr. Gregory Benford, who has his own very different alternative history about the Manhattan Project. But Greg, among his many other laurels, was Edward Teller's graduate student. Ed Teller was Greg's thesis supervisor. Obviously George Dyson, who I spoke to, who is Freeman's son, and who wrote the definitive history of the Project Orion. I got to spend an entire year researching this novel before I wrote the first word or even contemplated what I wanted to do in terms of how it was all going to tie together. And then when I saw, well, you've got Richard Feynman working on the Manhattan Project, and he was the guy whose diagrams showed that Dirac's mind experiment invention of antimatter, that you could easily explain negatively charged electrons as being nothing more than positively charged positrons moving backward in time, and Kurt Gödel talking about possible ways in which you might construct a universe in which time travel would be possible that satisfied Einstein's relativistic equations, and he worked on the Manhattan Project. And you have Oppenheimer, who was a stellar physicist, and he worked on it, and Hans Bethe, who was our greatest expert on stellar fusion, and he worked on it. And it was only through that full year of research that the ingredients for the stew got assembled. And then afterwards, I wanted to find some way to make an elegant an elegant, sumptuous dish out of them. But without that year of research, if I just started, there are novels about Oppenheimer, you can tell that the people have read exactly one book. And it's usually, there are two famous bios, one super famous and one not as famous. But since this is the science of, I'm going to recommend a book to you. The famous one everybody knows is American Prometheus. It won the Pulitzer Prize. And it's just a biography of Oppenheimer, the man. That's what it concentrates on. And you can't read it here, but the blurb at the very bottom of the book on the English edition, and it's somewhere on the interior pages on the American edition, or I should say the Canadian edition versus the American, is from Martin J. Sherwin, who co-wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography. But this is the scientific biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer. It's called Robert Oppenheimer, A Life Inside the Center. It's in the bibliography for the novel. There's Oppie. It was actually published in the UK under a slightly different title called In the Center, a scientific biography of Oppenheimer. But unlike the Sherwin and Kai Bird general biography, it doesn't concentrate on Oppie's affairs, his love life. It concentrates on Robert Oppenheimer, the scientist. And it's a good, solid, eminently accessible, but good, solid, meaty book. And if you want to learn more about Oppie as an atomic physicist, as an astrophysicist, as who he trained under Patrick Blackett, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Physics. And he tried to murder Patrick Blackett, by the way, who was his tutor at the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge. You want to read all that dirt? It's in here. It's in the scientific biography of Oppie. So. But that's the answer to how many hours. I am too tired to do the calculation of what 40 times 260 is. Jeff has already done it in his head. But whatever that number is, 40 hours a week for 260 weeks of a year, you know, everybody, 260 days of a year. That's not even the right figure. Oh, it's 40 times 50. That's 2,000, Jeff. I can do that in my head. 2,000 hours of research. Which is enough, I'm going to say, to hell with our fellow Canadian, what's that guy who, Gladwell, Malcolm Gladwell, whatever figure he had in his book about
10,000 hours. Yeah.
How many?
10,000 hours.
No,
Yeah.
it's 20,000. It's what I spent, 2,000.
Two-
It's whatever
2,000.
I spent on my book is the right answer.
5 years of work. 5 years of
Right.
work. That's the
1
truth.
year, if you're an average Joe. But come on.
So,
Anyways, my friends, thank you so much. You gave me a great evening. I hope I gave you a good one in return.
Yeah, rest your voice, Robert.
I will. I'm gonna have some tasty frozen ice treat, I think.
That's a great idea.
All right. Be well,
Thanks
my
again,
friends.
everyone.
Excellent.
Good
yeah,
night.
great.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Great
Bye.
to see you. Thanks for the
Thank
talk.
you.
Oh, you're
Stay
Yes.
safe, stay well.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Night.
Thank you.